All right. So again, I'm Annie Cruz. I'm the director of Blessed Tomorrow, which is the faith program here at ecoAmerica. And while we all tune in virtually, I am hosting from my home in Vienna, Virginia, which I want to honor as the ancestral home of the Manahoic people. I think this is going to be a really powerful and motivating conversation today. And I'm lucky that we're co-hosting this episode to talk about energy justice with the one and only Reverend Michael Malcom of the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. He's a friend, a colleague, a mentor at times, and someone you might call a righteous advocate, an action catalyst, and really just a great preacher and teacher. So I want to welcome Reverend Malcom to join us and offer him an opportunity to share some opening comments. Hope you're on mute still.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
There we go. I apologize. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here with us. Thank you to our other guest panelists who will also be coming along to speak on this very important subject of energy justice. It's extremely important in our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor and rural communities because it is often the Black, Brown, Indigenous, poor, and rural communities that are the ones that suffer disproportionately from excessive energy burdens. There are some solutions that we have in place that communities of faith can be a part of, both in implementation and in advocacy. You'll learn more about that today, but here's what I need you to know as communities of faith, as professionals, as medical professionals. I need you to know that this is extremely important because there are
I think we lost Michael there again. Reverend Malcom, I think you're muted again.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
We can. You were just talking about how important this was, so please feel free to continue.
Yes. And so this is important for communities of faith. This is important for medical professionals, healthcare professionals, because there are people who are literally dying in communities, not just from the poverty that is created from excessive energy burden or people are held hostage to poverty by excessive energy burden, but also the environmental injustices that are come to be as a result of this being produced as well. All right. For some reason, this screen keeps going in and out, so I'm not sure what's going on there.
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. And I apologize for this, you all. But so we are here because this is important and we definitely need to discuss it, but we need to discuss it with the framework that we need to be involved. We need to be involved as communities of faith, as faith leaders, as healthcare professionals, as those who have kids, as those who have grandparents. We all need to be involved, and we'll talk more because we've got some expert panelists that are coming up that have been involved with energy justice for a long time. We have both Liz Lee and Chandra Farley. I ain't gonna act like I don't know them and they ain't friends of mine, and so I'm not gonna make it too professional because I'm informal with them, and I'm gonna make sure I'm informal with you all when I'm introducing them. I love these people as community and as family, and I appreciate them, and I love what they'll bring to this table as well.
Amen. And it's wonderful to have you all here. I'll introduce more formally them just in a moment, but I just want to say, Rev, no problem at all. The Reverend is actually on the road doing this important work right now, and hopefully he'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about what he's been up to. So our other two guests, I want to welcome them onto video here. We have Chandra Farley and Elizabeth Chun. Chandra is the director with the Just Energy Director with the Partnership for Southern Equity, and Liz is the executive for Economic and Environmental Justice and Climate Justice with the United Methodist Women. So welcome to the conversation. And again, I think we all know each other, so this is going to be a great conversation. So let's go ahead, let's just dive in. I'll ask you the first question, and then again, let's just have a conversation together. But I know you all are coming to this work with really great passion, a sense of urgency, and obviously there are important stories to your roots in this work yourselves. So I'm wondering if you could just share with the audience, what was it, maybe when and how energy justice became that thing or that something that you knew you were called to pursue as part of your vocation. So I'll let anyone start.
I'm happy to start. So thanks so much for inviting me here to be today. It's always good to be here with my friends and fellow good troublemakers in the movement here. And I will say it's interesting. I think about this question a lot, but I do think back to a more immediate time when I just started working at South-Based Energy Institute, which is a building science organization region here in the Southeast. And I remember standing in the hallway during one of our trainings. So that organization has 40 years of doing energy audit, energy assessment, all kinds of trainings in the industry. And there was another Black woman standing in the hallway, because this is when I was working there and I was managing our trainings, meetings, and events, and I had probably was just checking on the coffee level or something like that. And we were listening to the training as they were talking about weatherization strategies. And I remember a very distinct moment and we looked at each other kind of, head cocked to the side, thinking about, it was like my auntie used to do, or like my grandmother used to do. They were talking about caulking the windows and making sure you had door sweeps under the door. And we were both like, who doesn't remember your grandmother telling you to shut that door, your auntie, your mama, or whoever, saying, shut that door, you're letting my air out, or turn those lights off when you leave the room, or seeing a towel rolled up at the bottom of the door to outside all my life. And now I think it's funny, they actually sell these things, you can buy these little snakes at the door. And it was just really at that moment where I was like, here once again is an example of the whole sustainability movement, right? We used to call it green bling. All of a sudden, it was this other thing that was being repackaged and sold back to the very people and communities who depended and still depend on these strategies to manage their lives for survival and as a way to save money and conserve. Black people, Indigenous communities, communities classified as low income are the original energy and environmental conservationists, right? This was born out of necessity and also an inherent connection to the land. We are earth workers. We are land working people. So I think that was a click for me at this moment, but I will say something else very interesting. As a child of the 70s, I'm from Tennessee, and in 1982, my daddy took us to the Knoxville World's Fair, the 1982 World's Fair. And on the way to Knoxville, you pass by Oak Ridge, and I used to be obsessed and terrified of nuclear, right? And so I would see the nuclear power plant, and he was always, my dad would be like, look, they're the reactors and things like that. And it wasn't until about a year ago, a friend of mine said that year, the theme for the World's Fair was energy, and there were energy displays all around. And so I think back to that, just this sort of inherent being, but having that exposure to something that you kind of understood and were interested in, but didn't really make those connections until years later. So I always think that's very interesting how I find myself in the work here today.
Thanks so much. Oak Ridge was the very first protest I ever went to. I think I was 19. Yeah. Liz or Michael, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Annie, I'd like to jump into that. So actually, I'm going to point back to Chandra because I actually was a part of the Just Energy Academy with the Partnership for Southern Equity. And I learned about energy justice in a more extensive way during that class. And what I learned was that it was systemic. And it actually helps to foster the poverty that we experience in our Black communities. As a pastor who was a pastor of a predominantly Black church, this concerned me. And I started asking the questions, who in my congregation is suffering from energy justice? Reality is, and I didn't have to look far. All I had to do was look in the mirror. Hell, it was me. I was suffering from it. Whenever you see yourself paying astronomically for a power bill that shouldn't cost you nearly as much, you're suffering from energy justice or energy injustice. And so putting two and two together and seeing the tie between this constant poverty as well as the pollution, it really compelled me to really get involved and see this sincerely. Now, as an executive director of an Interfaith Power and Light, with Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, we work with communities of faith to do energy efficiency on their houses of worship. But something in me wouldn't let me settle there. And I said to myself, now we spend in houses of faith, we probably spend 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week in that building. But the people who sit in that building spend all of their time in their homes. So who do we really need to help? And so I started looking at it and saying, we as communities of faith need to look at this as an outreach for our congregations and the communities that surround our congregations. And so I began to be an ambassador for energy justice and getting communities of faith to look at energy justice as a righteous act.
Another amen. Liz, you want to jump in and bounce off of that?
Sure. Thank you all for inviting me to participate, Reverend Malcom, Annie, and it's great to be with Chandra too. Yeah, just the role of faith communities are so important, and I'll get back to that. And working at United Methodist Women as women of faith, it is a core tenet, like, how do we care and respond, right? And live in the way that God calls us to. And around energy justice, I'll just back up to childhood. So I grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York, which is occupied Lenape land. And we were, people categorized as immigrant, working poor, low income, right? We lived in an apartment complex. And our apartment, it would get hot, right, in the 90s, but we couldn't afford air conditioning costs, right? It was just too expensive. And so it'd be 90s, high humidity, but we didn't turn on the AC, right? Because it was just too expensive. When we did, we just didn't have the money. And the winters, the only reason why we survived was because the building provided heat, right? Fast forward 30 plus years later, my parents are still in the same apartment. My dad, they're retired, but fixed income, and they get some funding, right, in terms of just reduction in cost because of their income situation. But he has an oxygen tank, right? And it costs a lot to run oxygen tanks, et cetera, just for his health because he has bronchiectasis. And it's a concern, right? We're looking at his financial bill, right, from the electricity bill and seeing what is affordable, what's doable. And it didn't really, so I knew that growing up at that reality, but I didn't know about resources, right? We were immigrant community, don't know what the access are, grants, et cetera. So just kind of kept that as a reality. And I didn't know terms like energy burden or energy justice, energy insecurity, et cetera, or that there were communities, Black communities, right? Indigenous communities, low-income communities that were suffering far worse than we were, right? And it was really until I started to work at with United Methodist Women and partnering with NAACP, and in particular, their Lights Out in the Cold report, reforming utility shutoff policies as if human rights mattered, and their Just Energy Policies report that really was eye-opening, both in terms of articulating like my childhood, but also that this was not an individual problem, but a larger systemic problem, a structural problem that Reverend Malcom was speaking about, right? And so I was just really struck by that, and then saying, well, what is the church community doing about it? I didn't hear about these realities, or my church growing up didn't talk about it. And what is the responsibility, right, to be in solidarity, or what the mandate of biblical witness, prophetic witness kind of calls us to engage in?
Yeah, no, it's incredible to hear the differences, but then the similarities between the stories here. And I'm hoping that anyone listening who may be passionate about health or climate or some other area and not necessarily thinking about energy justice and the connections between it will find some nuggets here that resonate with you, or that you feel motivated by. So thank you for sharing those stories. The next question I want to hop into here is, speaking to that, how do you differentiate energy justice from environmental justice or climate justice? And obviously, would they intersect, but how do they intersect and interact in your perspective and in regards to the work that you do and the communities that you work with? So that's to all of you, but who wants to hop on that one first?
Well, I need some clarification on that question, Annie, because that sounds like two different questions to me. One is asking, do we see any differences in it? The other one's asking, how do we see similarities? Am I right in that?
Yep, that's right. So yeah, if you want to take it one way and then we can come back the other.
Yeah. So yeah, there is no difference in energy justice and environmental justice. There is no difference in energy justice and climate justice, and here's why. The emissions that are produced by energy are the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing our planetary disruption or our climate disruption. One of the biggest causes for this is the fact that houses aren't sealed up. So homes are using way more energy because they're spending more energy cooling or heating the outside than the inside. And this is causing us to have greenhouse gases that are causing this climate disruption. There is no difference. This is happening predominantly to Black, brown, Indigenous, poor, rural communities. This is environmental injustice. There is no difference. And I need people to hear that. When kids get sick because of asthma, because of polluting facilities around them, 9 times or most times, those polluting facilities are supporting fossil fuel production or our energy production. That's killing them, and it should be concerning us. So there is no difference. All of it's lumped in there together when it comes down to it. And all of it affects both planet and people.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you, helped to make that connection. So I hope that that's not a question for anyone else on the phone today or on the call today. Liz or Chandra, I wonder if you want to elaborate or comment there.
Yeah, I'll just following up, Rev. I always think about my guide and elder things that she says, Dr. Mildred McLean, who's a healer and environmental justice legend, in this work. And we were having this conversation. She was like, it's all justice, and what is, we're talking about being blessed, what is justice, moral rightness, equitableness, just behavior and treatment. And we can take that from any perspective, from any topic area. We can have a conversation about we have housing justice, we have energy justice, we have environmental justice, social justice, racial justice. It's all justice. And that is due to the legacy of slavery, the legacy of extreme extraction of people and resources. That is due to a system of white supremacy in this nation that causes injustice to be weaved through every single system and structure and institution that we participate in or have to depend on to live, right? So when we are talking about justice work, you know, our approach at Partnership for Southern Equity is all about systems transformation, right? And we take the perspective that, you know, there are interpersonal things, right? But we have to change hearts and minds, which, you know, I love the work of our faith community. And on the system side, we have to transform these systems. We have to address the past harm and then work to repair and transform these inequitable and extractive systems. So yeah, you know, it is all justice. You know, energy, you know, for me is something that I feel like I kind of stumbled into, you know, but not really. It's, you know, it's obviously something that, you know, struck and spoke directly to me, you know, because of work that I have long done. And just like the ridiculousness of somebody having an $800 bill because of utilities or because of regulation. It's like, hell no, right? Like, here is the person that is making this decision. Here is the venue you need to be in to do something about it. And we can do something about it. So that, you know, for me is the space that is inextricably connected to environmental justice, is inextricably connected to climate justice, which at PSE, you know, our focus is just energy equity. But that is because of, as Rev was talking about, we can't separate that from the fossil fuel economy that has been extractive and harmful. So our energy equity, energy justice work stems from and supports that larger climate justice, environmental justice narrative that we find ourselves in as a part of that whole ecosystem of justice work, which is racial justice work. Because when we look at the impacts of energy injustice and environmental injustice and climate injustice, we can't divorce that from racial capitalism and harmful extractive industry.
Liz?
Yeah, so I so appreciate what is being said, because there's so often, it seems in certain groups, like the desire to like silo. This is this, neatly package this definition. You know, energy justice folk work on this, climate justice, racial justice, you know, and when it's not like that, right? It's intersectional fundamentally. And so how do we, you know, really acknowledge the realities of frontline impacted communities and how they're seeing it, and then from there, and then from there do the work, right? And so just really wanting to affirm that it is all of the above. With United Methodist Women, and for me personally, I got into the work from really much more of a climate justice work, right? We're 4% of the world's population, 25% of greenhouse gas emissions cumulatively, this disproportionate impact and harm of the climate crisis. It's in communities of color, low income, low wealth communities in the United States, but also those least responsible globally, right? So I was working at the World Council of Churches, working on climate displacement in the mid 2000s with the UN. And it was crazy because the definition, right, even of a climate refugee, at that point, the UN wasn't even recognizing it, right? Even though we were having our members from the World Council of Churches in Tuvalu, Fiji, Philippines, speaking about the climate crisis, right? And the harm that is having, and also in the United States and who it's harming, and yet, international community wasn't dealing with it. And I was also just recently on some conversations with some of our regional missionaries who are from various countries, like in Sierra Leone. And she was actually one of our regional missionaries there. She was just talking about the reality of the climate crisis in Sierra Leone, and also the energy justice and injustice that exists there, right? So the energy injustice exists not only in the United States, but globally as well. And the solution for Energy justice is connected to climate justice, which is connected to racial justice, environmental justice. And that is how the work in faith communities really should be looking at it, right? We don't say your program office and racial justice is doing this, climate justice is doing this, et cetera. And in particular, in some of the environmental and climate groups still, I think there is still a siloing that takes place where racial justice, climate justice are not connected, or energy justice, right? It's more policies, utilities, regulations that don't have a justice or equity lens to it.
Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this phone is aggravating me. I actually wanted to come off of mute when Chandra finished and give you an example of the injustice that we suffer from. And I'm going to say particularly in the South, but I know that it's everywhere. And I can definitely say that we experience this in Black communities. So many of the programs that would address weatherization don't address renters. Black folk have lost 90% of their land wealth. Guess who the renters are? So you have people who are in subsidized housing who are paying $500 and $800 light bills. That doesn't include food, that doesn't include water, their light bill. They're already living either right at the poverty line or somewhere below the poverty line. And now they have to make a decision on paying a light bill. How do we expect for them to come out of poverty? You have mothers who are having to decide if they will give their kids a healthy food, a healthy meal, or if they'll have to give them something cheap in order for them to be able to keep the lights on. You have grandmothers out here who are deciding whether or not they will pay for their medicine or pay their light bill. There is something morally wrong with our society to make people have to pay this money to live. And here's the kicker. The way that the system is set up, they don't even really need our money. That's not how they get paid. They get paid on expansion. That's why if a project fails, they still get paid on it. We just have to pay them. There's something morally wrong with that system. And therefore, communities of faith are challenged and called in this moment to address that.
Preach it. Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Rev. And just building on that, I think about the pandemic, right? That started and we were in lockdown and the result of that, because so many jobs were lost, right? And it has led to, how much is it now? Like $28 billion as in March in terms of power utility debt, right? What does that mean, right? So people who must have energy, and we're going into the summer where it's gonna get hot, and for their own health and well-being, because the summers have become hotter and hotter, they need air conditioners, right? For basic cooling and basic survival. Is this not a human right to be able to survive and thrive, right? But all this debt that's existing, and there has been very limited effort on the federal government side and many governors and state leadership to put an end, to utility shutoffs, right? There needs to be an addressing of this debt, because communities cannot pay, families cannot pay. It's not like they're trying to buy a Tesla, right, with the funds. They don't have the funds, right? it is, as Reverend Malcom was saying, they're having to make life choices about their own livelihood survival. And so as faith communities, we need to speak up and say, this is wrong. And our leaders need to really respond and say, we're talking about infrastructure, big picture, but like it has to incorporate justice, both in terms of buildings, right? And in terms of clean energy, renewable energy, all of those things, but also in terms of addressing the debt that will further put people in further debt, impoverishment, et cetera, and not break the cycle of poverty that our systems and structures have created.
And I think you both have been getting at the varied ways that faith communities can show up in this work. And there's kind of the micro level and in supporting individuals and their families and their neighborhoods and communities, but then also this very critical policy piece that needs to happen. And so I know you're all working on this in some way, but I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you and your organizations are trying to support faith communities and others to take action. And Rev, I wonder if you want to start, and you can even share a little bit about what you're doing on the road today.
Yeah, so right now I'm in the South. I'm doing a tour of the South where I'll be going to different states and looking at justice issues. Listening and lifting is what it's called, a listening and lifting tour, where I'll be listening to communities about justice issues, in particular energy justice issues, and lifting up not only their issues, but also lifting up the victories and the victors as well, so that people can get a holistic picture of what's happening in the South. I think the South has something to say, and folk need to hear it. So that's what I'm doing in the South. But at the same time, the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light has introduced We Rise, which is weatherizing every resident in the Southeast, where we want to work with communities of faith to do energy justice and, in particular, weatherization as weatherization implementation as an outreach ministry for your congregation. We want you to be able to go and work with your community to get those homes weatherized, whether they renters or not. Because at this point, we are in a crisis and we need emergency relief. So we need some guerrilla type of goodness done in this world. And basically, that means we do good and make them make us stop. And when they try to make us stop, we are asking the question, well, why aren't you doing it? That's where the advocacy comes in. And so we're working with a few tables around the clean energy standard and the renewable energy portfolio, trying to make sure that EJ communities are represented and at the table so that we can decide our own fate and not be guinea pigs for innovation and not continue to live under the pollution and the assault of energy injustice. So these are the things that I'm up to right now and happening in the South and happening this summer. And I'd love, love, love for those who can to be a part of it.
We just shared the link to the program here in the chat for those who are watching. So please check it out. And I just want to encourage our audience, start asking questions in the chat. We're going to be capturing those and getting to live Q&A in just a moment. So I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers to share.
Yeah, on the action part, we've got to take action at all levels right now. We at PSE, as Reverend Michael Malcom mentioned, he was one of the participants in our Just Energy Academy. So one of our core strategies at PSE is community leadership development. So we have a number of academies focused on our issue areas where we bring in resident leaders, aspiring youth leaders together to learn about racial equity, community leadership, but also like Energy 101, Energy Policy 101, environmental justice. They all work on community projects where they're able to apply either things that they've learned in the academy to their neighborhoods and their communities, Some of them, leaders come to the academy with projects, and then I count on these folks. They become my partners, to help us expand our reach and make sure we know where we can direct resources on the ground. So that's one. Two, I think that a lot of this is also about tearing down the stigma around not being able to pay your bill or being behind on your bill. This is an issue of poverty, which we know brings a lot of shame, but then also it is an issue of capitalist greed, right? There is absolutely no reason someone should have a $700-800 utility bill. And so we need to make sure when we're doing this education and talking about energy justice in the church and in the community, it's like, you are not alone. Like, we want to bring people together to say, is your bill this much? Why? Well, let's look at our house. Have we done everything? Let's call our utility. Let's call our public service commissioner. They are quick. The utility commissions and commissioners are quick to say, well, I haven't heard from anybody about their bill, because I think we inherently think, because it's connected to a bill payment, that we are doing something wrong. And that is how we have been conditioned, right? That we just can't afford these things because it's some fault of us, versus shining the light back on utility monopolies and capitalism. And then at the federal level, for the last year, I've been a part of, and folks here have been a part of, the No Shutoffs Coalition, which has been pushing for that national action against utility shutoffs. Liz mentioned that. So PSE, Center for Biological Diversity, Food and Water Watch, Free Press Action, and Corporate Accountability have been linking arms with leaders like Reverend Michael Malcom and Liz to push this federal call for action to put a moratorium on electricity, water, and broadband shutoffs. And we're seeing a lot of piecemeal things happen. People definitely jumped on broadband. There's some new programs and lots of action happening around water. We have to ask ourselves, why are we holding back on utilities? I mean, I think we know why. The utility lobby, we're talking about these utilities. These are billion-dollar monopolies. They wield a lot of power. They donate money not just to legislators, but to community groups like those we are trying to work with to keep them quiet, right? Here's $5,000 for your homecoming dinner and whatnot. And so we have to, okay, yeah, we appreciate that, but that is not going to stop us from calling you out at the Public Service Commission, in the media, about that this is wrong. And it was striking to me. So here in Georgia last summer, who was one of the first states or investor-owned utilities to begin shutoffs in the hottest month of the year, actually one of the hottest Julys ever recorded due to climate change, and has shut off, over 100,000 people. And my friend Jean Sue at Center for Biological Diversity, this is violence. This is energy violence. Why, when you have a CEO of a utility whose salary doubled almost from $13 million to $28 million a year after advancing a rate increase on customers, and you feel like, you could have wiped out all of that debt, which you have already admitted to saying really wasn't a big deal to your shareholders, that they weren't worried about it, with like an eighth of your salary, basically. We have to talk about, all from utilities to community, to capitalism, to the legislature. So I would encourage people, there's another act Senator Merkley has introduced, Maintaining Access to Essential Services Act of 2021. That's been referred to the Finance Committee. So, we can make some calls, we've got to keep up the drumbeat. It's been about a year now because this was an issue that existed before the pandemic, right? Elizabeth mentioned the lights out in the cold report. Everything that happened during the pandemic was an exacerbation and amplification of injustice and inequities and gross injustices that Black people, Indigenous communities, low wealth, were already experiencing at an acute level. And COVID just like put that on steroids, right? So the things that we are talking about right now should be framed in a way that we're not just talking about recovery from the pandemic. We're talking about an opportunity to finally fully transform these systems that have been historically oppressive to the communities and groups that we are all a part of and represent.
Absolutely. And again, we're sharing links out to all of the things folks are referencing here. So if you caught it and you want to go, just check out the chat because it's probably linked there for you. I know, Liz, you're working at the federal level on several aspects of trying to help your membership, take action on this. And I'm interested in hearing about that in a moment, but I want to talk about helping people understand the connection between what they're facing today and the concept of energy. I think if we talk about energy, Liz, you were talking about, utilities and these big companies and, not necessarily making the connection down to, the fact that I can't pay my bill or I'm choosing between groceries and, and my healthcare bill or paying this electric bill is actually related to some systemic issue. You've all touched on that a little bit. So how do you talk to people about it? What kind of language and storytelling are you using to help people understand and be motivated to speak up and be motivated to take action, whether in the communities you're working with or those other communities who maybe aren't paying attention to this and should be? And I'll let anyone start.
I can start us off. So I think about the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, and he had 3 simple rules. Do no harm, do good, and attend to the ordinances of God, or stay in love with God is another way people translated that, right? So one of the things that United Methodist Women we try to do is to ask members, right? Because we all use energy. And first, when we ask the question, like, do you have a story about energy, right? I have yet to be in a webinar workshop where someone's like, I have no story about energy, right? It's either about, like, for me, a blackout, or someone else with their acid rain pollution because of energy, or the high cost of energy. It varies, but there is some sort of connection. And it's a reminder of how we're all connected with the energy system in some form. And if we didn't have it, the reminder, like in Texas, right, with the blackout that happened in the winter storm, and who did not have access to the energy, who did, and the cost as a result in the storm, that energy is a vital part of our lives. It is a human right in many ways, just for our survival these days. And from there, then asking the question, does our energy system do no harm, right? Does it do good? And when we ask that question of do no harm, that's a fairly clear answer in terms of, as Chandra and the Reverend were both speaking about, the source of our energy, predominantly in the United States, right? 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, and 8% from nuclear, which is harmful too, and then about, going up, in terms of renewable energy. And so, so what does that mean, right? In terms of most of the energy is harmful for climate. It's the cause, right, of climate crisis, as Rev said, but also there's co-pollutants that are destroying our health. And disproportionately, these fracking sites, these power plants, transmission lines, peaker plants, where are they located at, right? Communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities, Hispanic communities, low wealth communities, a few pockets of Asian American communities, right? But it's there, and so much so that there is a pollution burden, right, by Black and Hispanic communities, and a pollution advantage by white communities related to fossil fuels. And so talking about that, unpacking that, and saying our climate crisis is directly connected to the energy system that we are all fundamentally participating in, and that we have the ability to do good, right? To advocate for change in the United States, saying we can advocate for policies, because some of our members are like, well, I can just get an electric vehicle, right? It's like, well, where is your electricity coming from? 60% of that electricity comes from fossil fuels. So that's not going to help, right? Or what if I just go off grid? Well, what about everyone else, right? There's much that needs to happen, and that means at the federal level, especially with the infrastructure package in this particular moment, we can actually make a huge impact. Certain states have been doing significantly more work, but if we have a federal legislation that moves forward, that passes for 100% renewable energy, economy-wide as our vision, that is pollution-free, so not nuclear, not biomass then, it will change the system, right? And then as part of that, we need to make sure that solar recycling programs, right? Because where will the waste go? What do you do with the existing power plants? Who pays for it? Will it continue to be on the backs and bodies of communities of color? No, it can't be, right? Polluters pay. So I think that is the vision we need to be advocating for in this particular moment. So some of the things that we've been doing is doing the education, speaking about it, and then saying, well, it's not only we could talk about it and pray about it, right? We pray about it in our votes, in our calling, and our legislative action. So the past few months, we've been actually having legislative visits. So yesterday we had legislative visits with some of our Senate staffers, like in West Virginia, Michigan, North Carolina. We've been doing that a few months ago, really saying, as people of faith, we are deeply concerned about the climate crisis, health pollution, energy justice, and the solution is through 100% renewable energy, right, in transportation, electricity, and resilience, and centering the voices and funding for BIPOC communities.
Well, thank you so much for that work. And how are those conversations going? Are your members reporting back that, what are they reporting back to you? I'm so curious.
Oh, it's been very interesting.
Yeah.
We had a debrief yesterday. Some had said this was their first time doing legislative visits, and that it was really powerful for them to speak, right? And share about those concerns. Some of them it's their second time because we had one in April, and that they're building relationships. But some were like saying that their Senate staffers, right, were saying, no, infrastructure is defined very narrowly in this way. No, you want electric school buses? Talk to the companies. It's a company responsibility, right? So it's not the responsibility of government to step in or to provide the funds or even the incentive for school buses, right? Because school buses want to move in that direction. They may not have the funds, right? And so we were debriefing that. And so I asked some of them, some of you are meeting with Senate and House where the reps and senators are opposed. And they had commented, but it is so important for us to continue to speak, right? Because if there are more of us who are saying this, how could they not listen to us? Right. And there are so many more. And so it was just powerful to see that. But yes, there are certainly people who, senators, and as we know, and House representatives who disagree, but people of faith are speaking up, saying no, and they cannot say no one in their district or state disagrees with them.
Powerful. I'll ask Chandra or Michael if there's anything you wanted to share in terms of what language you're using or how you build these connections and motivate people.
So prior to, can you all hear me? Okay. Prior to me getting into this movement, I used to work at car dealerships and I ran the service department, meaning people would come to me because their car was broke. Typically, when I speak with people about energy bills, it's the same way. You're not coming to me because things are going right. When you see me, it's because it's already going bad. I just need to point out to you what's going bad. When we deal with EJ communities, it's already bad. We just need to point out to them what's going bad. So for me, it's are you hurting? Yes. Why are you hurting? And then we inform them of why they're hurting. It's plain talk. I don't talk greenhouse gases. I'm not speaking planetary concerns. I'm concerned with what's going on in your house and where the pain is. And let's deal with the pain.
Yeah, connecting right there with them and what they're experiencing. Well, I think by doing. Oh, I'm sorry. I think by doing that, Annie, I believe that you make a connection with them on a human level and a personal level that they can grab hold to. But at the same time, if they do something about it, they're doing something about the planet as well. Mm-hmm.
I'll continue to say this. I think I've said it on this show before, but I'll say it again, and I'll say it until I leave away from here. If you'll help the people, you'll heal the planet.
Mm-hmm.
We just got our logic all jacked up.
Mm-hmm.
We running and trying to save the planet, and the people are dying. Well, they dying because of the same thing that's killing the planet.
Amen. See, I'm normally like someone who would be doing this right now. So my hands are under the table doing it a little bit, Rev. But yeah, it's powerful. You know, I grew up in a low-income community and with some of the oldest housing stock in the country in Newburgh, New York. And, you know, we had lead paint and cockroaches and, you know, everything in between. And I don't know that you would have been able to come to me and my family back then and talk to us about anything. You know, my mom was post-dating checks and sending them 2 weeks late to the electric company. And then when they would call her, she'd say, it's in the mail. I don't know what happened. You know, I mean, it's that kind of experience that if someone's mired in that, it's very difficult to bring you up into policy work, right? But I just think it's so powerful that the work you're all doing to help motivate and you're providing people agency to actually do something about it, right? So that they don't feel alone and they don't feel like they're stuck. And so I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. We have a couple of questions that have come in, so I want to just quickly move to those. Folks are looking for hope and how they can get involved with your work. So I'm wondering if if there's something that you're excited about, that you're looking forward to, you're talking about some of the policy work that's going on, but is there anything else that you're really feeling motivated by? And then how can people get directly connected to your work?
I'm going to quote Dr. McLean again. Just find your justice home. You know, I think we get this question a lot. How do we get plugged into your work? Find your work. Find your justice home, your church. You go to church. Does your job have a partner, community partner organization? Sometimes I think we make this too hard, right? And to Rev's point, you help the people, you heal the planet. There are any number of initiatives that you can, get involved in to start making your way towards what speaks to you, right? I think that's, for first and foremost. And number two, there's a couple of immediate things I think that are really important to the bigger picture of what we're talking about for us. Obviously making calls, to, about the American Jobs Plan, but there are billions of dollars that have already been allocated from the American Rescue Plan that is sitting in state agencies, sitting in local municipalities, and these folks don't know the things that they can do with that money. There's money in there for utility assistance, there's money in there for weatherization, there's money in there for energy efficiency, rent assistance, all of the things we've been talking about for the last year. There are dollars that have already been deployed. And that is another way to get connected to that state and local decision-making, which is critical, particularly when we're talking about things like energy, because those are really federal levers support, but there are things happening now that people can do. Find out who your public service commissioner is, or who your public utility commissioner is. Maybe you are served by an electric membership cooperative. Find out who your board members are. Think about running for the board. And if you're interested in doing that, give us a call. If you are served by a municipal utility, either your city council or a separate utility commission is making those decisions. These are the people who decide where your energy comes from and how much you pay for it. So I think, not being afraid to get down into the weeds a little bit. If you've made calls to your legislator, the same thing, calling your utility commission, and they might go to church with you, or they might be, in the Rotary Club with you. They're a lot closer. And to Liz's point, definitely, on, the bigger, from the ground to the bigger scale, start No Climate, No Deal. Start reaching out to your legislators and making sure that they understand that this is a time for transformation. This is not the time to shrink from our responsibility.
Absolutely.
Liz, I'll let you go. I'll let you go, Liz, because I'm totally radical on that question.
And I don't want to go after the preacher either, so I will go. Yeah, thank you. This is, yeah, so powerful and so many things. I'm taking notes even as Chandra's speaking. Yeah, in terms of how to get involved, one is obviously we have United Methodist Women, but one of the things that we say with our members is reach out and partner and attend the environmental justice organizations meetings, right? So don't do it alone. And who are we going to reach out to as faith community? Will we focus on the green groups, or the frontline communities who are most impacted? And energy justice, climate justice, environmental justice is about centering those impacted, right? So as faith communities, I think we have a responsibility, right, to affirm the agency, dignity of all of God's creation, and those who are being impacted should have that voice, right? Jesus was speaking, right, from the highways and the byways, and whose voices was he centering? And we need to do likewise, which also means within our own faith communities, are we centering the voices of those most impacted as well, right? Because our members are those who are being impacted directly. So are we giving leadership space for those individuals? And I think about that with UMW, and we still have work to do as well. So I think there is a role of faith-based community, but it's not a developing program and doing all of these things, right? But it's doing that partnership and seeing where can we as faith communities support that, right? And so like we have as United Methodist Women, we want to understand what is our faith calling us to do as women of faith, right? And how do we do that in a way that is just as well? How do we redirect our funds and our partnership, et cetera? So wanted to note that. I love what Chandra said about call your PSCs and then look at their, what the connection is, because we certainly have a number of United Methodists who are on public service commissions, including in Georgia. And so like members were doing particular calls. I'm a United Methodist, and as a person of faith, the book of Resolution 1001 actually speaks about like responsibility around energy, right? So I think we can tap into our faith traditions and then use that as a guide. And related to that is, well, what are we doing in our Bible studies, in our synagogues, in our Sunday schools, in our preaching? Are these brought up as topics, right? So I think the more we talk about it, invite organizations like PSC to speak, et cetera, that it gives more of a space for us to then mobilize, get educated, mobilize, and really seek the concrete changes that we need. So Rev, I'm gonna hand it over to you because I know that you're gonna move us.
No, so the first part of the question, how can people get in touch or how can they help or whatever? If you want to reach out to the People's Justice Council, they've given you the website. Feel free to reach out. If you call that number, you're calling me directly. I don't hide from folk. So feel free to give me a holler. Now, as far as where to find this hope, the hope is in the fight. That's where the hope is. Everybody's looking for something to grab hope to. No, get in the fight. Get in the fight. As Chandra just said, find your justice home, but get in the fight. Let's not be spectators when we're supposed to be actors. In my Christian faith, as well as in the Jewish faith, there's a scripture or a story or narrative when the children of Israel are getting ready to go across the Red Sea or go across the Red Sea. It says that the church or the priest went before them. Let us get in the fight, because if we get in the fight, spirit gets in the fight. And when spirit gets in the fight, things begin to change. But if we aren't in the fight, we don't invite spirit to get in the fight. So let us get in the fight, and that's where we'll find our hope. The hope is in the fight, because when we start fighting and spirit starts fighting, we can step back and watch spirit move. But if you don't start, you're not given permission. So get in the fight, and you'll find your hope.
Amen. That is your call to action today, everyone. And you are not alone, because everyone here is with you. And most, I hope folks on the listening in and tuning in on the recording as well are with you. So we're going to have to end there. We're just at time. I just want to say a huge thank you to our guests today. Again, we have Reverend Malcom, Chandra, and Liz. Thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your leadership. Again, please check out the work of their organizations, get involved with them or others in your community. And you can also sign on today to the ecoAmerica Momentous campaign to commit to call on others, to commit yourself and to call on others to have carbon emissions each decade going forward. You can do that at ecoamerica.org/momentous. So again, we're at the end of our time together. For all of our listeners, please make sure you click on the link to the survey when this webcast ends to provide your feedback. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can check out the description below to let us know what you think. Engage with us online, again, using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletters and our social media for additional thought leadership and resources. Also, make sure you check out previous Let's Talk Climate episodes and the wealth of additional conversation on today's topic and more from sessions at the 2021 American Climate Leadership Summit. That's all available on demand on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. So with that, from all of us at ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow, thank you. Get in the fight. Your passion is important. Your commitment is needed, and we are always with you and support you. So we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.